Hey Sergio, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk about one of my long-time special interests for many years, and that is the integration of world music and cultures and our modern psychotherapies. So one thing I always emphasize in my group work is that raise the question: why is it that in our modern psychotherapy that it's basically just the therapist and the client just sitting there and talking? And I always try to make a big point in all of my work that each person has many different ways of expressing themselves. For example, verbal expression is not necessarily the most profound expression, not necessarily the most honest expression, and some people can be more comfortable expressing themselves through music, through art, through dance, and through drama. And so in my work, I try to give people to find the medium that's most appropriate for them. Many times people can warm themselves up through the other arts. For example, I can maybe warm myself up through a music expression that will warm me up to a more honest and open verbal expression. And the same thing comes through movement or through art and so on. But anyhow, in terms of world cultures and the world traditions of music and healing, I've been really fortunate in my life. I've been able to travel the world, and for example, here we are in our living room, and so here's just a few instruments and things. This is a didgeridoo, a traditional instrument of the Aboriginal people in Australia. This is a valiha. It's a traditional string instrument from Madagascar. Here's a Navajo rattle over here. Here's some shadow puppets from Indonesia. And there's so many wonderful cultures, and all those cultures have their own traditions of healing.
I was reading a paper that you gave me yesterday, and in one of the pages you wrote something like, one of the questions that I typically ask at the beginning of my workshops is, how old is music therapy? The usual responses are either in the range of 20 to 50 years or going back to the very roots of humanity. And of course, both kinds of responses are correct, but in very different ways.
Okay, I agree that's a very basic and important question. So we talk, for example, if we talk about music therapy, and actually not only about music therapy, but really all the modern creative arts therapies, they have a relatively brief history. For example, with my own special area of music therapy, it really, around 1950, we had our first university training program in music therapy. We had our first National Music Therapy Association, so that's only about 60 years ago. So I say a lot of that began in the US, but really contemporary things were happening in European countries, eventually spread to Latin American countries, to Asian countries, and so on. And so, for example, every few years we have international music therapy conferences, and we have music therapists coming from 40 or 50 countries around the world. But anyway, that's sort of music therapy is a modern healthcare profession. But if we want to look at the real sources of where all that come from, they go back. I mean, there's evidence that I can show you that gives pretty definitive proof that, for example, music therapy has a history of at least, say, 35, 40, maybe 50,000 years. So I always talk about the idea, on the one hand, we have a tradition of 50 years, music therapy, and really all the other modern psychology and so on, really talking about Freud and all that. All those traditions really go back 50 or 60 years. So you have those traditions that have that 50-year history. Then we could look at the world traditions of music and healing, and they have a documented history of, let's say, 50,000 years. So on the one hand, 50 years, on the other hand, 50,000 years. So we say we have a lot to learn from 50,000 years of clinical practice.